millions of people aren't making it. Millions of people who have become Christ's. Since day one until now, millions haven't made it. There are countless millions who never made it into Christ, who haven't lived before they died. Why don't people make it? Why do people die without ever living? Why do we hear again and again of Harry, who never missed an assembly, who was always involved and enthusiastic, who at one point had people in his home on a regular basis to say things to them about the Christ, who lived the Christ before people in his work. Whatever happened to Harry? Well, he just doesn't come anymore. They must have read, of course, the letters of Paul to Timothy. Till I come, he said, give heed to public reading. And I suspect when he read the second letter to Timothy, and someone was bending over when they read, Demas has forsaken me, the head went up and said, Who? Who did he say? Demas. Demas? Gone. Just never made it. One of the very sad passages in the New Testament is he began to build and couldn't finish. Psalm 73 says, Look, I know God is good to Israel. I know He is. But as for me, you know, my foothold was almost gone. My feet had begun to slip. And in the middle of Corinth, Paul said to a group of people, don't give up. Don't grow weary in well-doing. Saul in the Old Testament began well, and his life ends with a corpse hanging on a wall, Beth-shan. He just didn't make it. There are people who are loved ones of yours, family members of yours, friends of yours, who never knew the Christ, who never lived life of joy, who never knew forgiveness. And there were those who were the Christs and died. Why is that? Some of them are worn down by life's inequities. They're born and they come up looking for life. Their eyes are full of hope in their children. And they just get beaten down. It isn't that they fragment at one moment of terrible stress. They're just weary. They hurt day after day. She lived 2 doors below us. Her name was Alice. She never was Christ's. I could see her very plainly. She'd lean on the side of the door, arms folded, one of those aprons that was customary for our ladies to wear, down round her shins. She had 4 children. She had and I don't mean this to be rude, I just mean to be plain. She had a husband who was a drunken bum. He enjoyed beating her and enjoyed it quite often. She never had a penny. She reminds me of all of the women I've ever known, all of the people I've ever known, who from the cradle to the grave never know what it is, never know what it is to go to a shop, see something they want, and buy it without doing some serious arithmetic first. She was 32 years old. She was thin, too thin. And her skin was transparent, like some kind of china porcelain or something. And she had these big, big, blue, lovely eyes. And she died at 32, second heart surgery. And we put her into the ground, looked at one another, and shrugged. You know, what? Worn down, no brakes, nothing for them. She used to kid with the neighbors all the time, wisecracking here and there. But those of us who knew her would find her crying lots of times, wondering how the bills were going to be paid, wondering how the kids were going to have a decent meal. All this is so. People are worn down. Not only were we not able to show her Christ, we weren't able to watch her enjoy life. And that's what God made her for. It's easy for richly blessed people to think they would be as noble and devout as they are now if they'd not been richly blessed. But take away our friends and our families. Take away the Christian colleges. Take away the Sunday school teachers. Take away the mothers and fathers who cared about the Christ and the grandparents who shaped and molded us. Take us away from all of the friends whose thoughts center around the Christ. Wipe all of that out and have us born in some back street somewhere in Calcutta or Bombay or the back street of Belfast or New York or somewhere. Take away all of that and load us and burden us down with the life that people are living in their countless millions day after day. And then let me hear you talk about how noble we would all be, huh? My master sat and watched donkeys walking up and down. I know he did. He did everything else like that. Heads down, trudging in the dirt. That resigned, beaten look that donkeys always seem to wear. Piled up with burdens to the sky. You know what Christ thought of? People. And he'd watch oxen in the heat with one of these big, wooden, bulky yokes, tearing the shoulders off them, dragging a yoke from one end of the field to another, day after day, week after week, month after month, until life was over. And the Christ didn't think simply of oxen, he thought of people. And he said, "You come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, learn of me. For I'm meek and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest to your soul." My master knew that people were worn down by life. And the religion that should have lifted their hearts and given them hope, religion that should have made a difference, that helped them to live with their arthritis, with their exploitation, with their oppression, with their loneliness, with their bewilderment, the religion that should have been a lift, the God who should have been carrying them was presented to them as a burden. And instead of being helped, they were additionally being crushed. And he said, "Father, we've got to do something about this." And his father said, "I know. Let's do something about it." People lose. They don't have the strength or power to see it through because they're worn down by the struggle against sin. Arthur Gossett said, "Those who fail in religion, the great majority do it through sheer depression and a daunted feeling that it has been proved to be no use, in their case anyway, to say yes to God and struggle against sin. At best, things turn out not at all what they expected. You know what they'd supposed? They'd supposed that one pitched, hard battle against sin would have settled the whole issue. That there would be nothing left but the hunting down of a few broken groups of disheartened wickednesses. And then the procession through the cheering streets of their life. That's what they expected. But to their dismay, they waken up to discover that they are immersed in a prolonged campaign of dull trench warfare, in which from day to day not much that is vital seems to happen, till growing heartsick of the mud and the shelling, the brave rushes that appear to make no appreciable difference on the long lines as a whole, they patch up a poor compromise, a kind of makeshift and dishonorable peace, and slink off home, where things go more wrong tragically, and they fling down their weapons and surrender themselves. They stop trying. They assume hopelessly that nothing further can be done, and they let the fierce currents of their nature drift them where they will. That's how souls get down. They're beat. They're tired. We make promises to them in the name of God about the evil that is rooted in their hearts and lives that by and by become too discouraging. Sin has two faces. The flagrant ungodliness of a rebellious and wild-eyed life. And the other is pathetic and trivial lives. And we're bored sick. People don't have the power to see it through because they are worn down by life's inequities, because they are worn down by struggle against sin, and because they have the sneaking suspicion that for all the preachers talk, for all the elders talk, for all the teachers talk, God doesn't really care. They've heard the words of Psalm 8, and they look at the universe so huge, and they think, how could he bother? Is that strange? Is that so hard to understand? He said, I look at all of this, and I wonder, why would you bother? And people in the millions think that's so. And they look at the suffering in the world, and they think, how could it make any difference to him? And they look at their pathetic and useless lives, and while they shave or put their makeup on, they think, you're useless. I can't stand you. You're unbearably trivial. You're paltry. You get excited for 5 minutes and you're indifferent for years. How would anyone tolerate you? How would one who cares so deeply for the world care about you? You sickening, trivial person. And they walk off. And the hard looks of the dedicated, which they feel that they fully deserve, only says to them that the friends of God don't care. How could God possibly care? People can't see it through because they're bored powerless and listless by the lack of challenge or relevancy in the Christ they hear proclaimed. The big issues are church attendance and contributions. The big preaching issues are very often why we have it right and everybody else is wrong. For God's sake, after a while, I don't want to hear how right I am. I want to hear that God is there for me, to make a difference in my life, not just to forgive me, but to give me some drive. That when my life is through, That when my life is through, I'll say, God, I lifed it up, but the little I did because you moved me to it. And that there is someone alive or dead who stands before God and says, I'm glad he was alive. Teaching's often teaching correct views to those who have heard them for years, and the exposing of the errors of people who are never present. But I think I hear we're getting tired of that, aren't we? We want more. We want more for ourselves. We want more for our people. We want more for the world. Aren't we beginning to believe that God loves all of us, Christian and non-Christian alike? Aren't we really? There is seeing it through and seeing it through, of course, isn't there? I've met people who never seem to have a moment's doubt, whose smiles are always there, whose lives are lovely. God bless you. You know where your power comes from. And then I've met people, and I don't mean to be rude. Honestly, I don't want to be rude about this. But I've met people, it appears, that they only carry as much as they want to carry as long as they want to carry it, not a moment longer. And they narrow their lives, and they feel no pain. They don't understand the notion, the power to see it through. Is there somebody struggling? I have no message for people who don't have any pain. And I don't have any message for those who don't know anybody who doesn't have any pain. This is a struggler's talk. The people who either struggle or who know those who struggle and care that people struggle. But if you narrow your life and don't take upon you the fellowship of the sufferings of Christ, you lose. You lose. Catherine Mansfield was born in New Zealand. She died in France at 35 years old in 1923. She was a writer of short stories. She was very good. Her friends told her she was extraordinarily brilliant. She didn't believe them. She died of tuberculosis. They found her a couple of days before she died. She was crying, and a couple of friends said, "Why are you weeping?" She said, "Oh, it's my stories. They're no good. I couldn't show one of them to God." Don't you hate that? You know what's going to happen one of these days? We're all muddling our way through, more or less, aren't we? One day I'm going to get to heaven, and Christ is going to say, "Oh, Jim, glad you're home." And I'm going to tell him, "So am I." And he's going to slip his arm around my shoulder, and I'm going to say to him, "Lord, I loused it up terribly, but I really did the best I could." And he's going to hold me just that little bit tighter, and he's going to say, "Oh, Jim, I always knew you could do better than what you did. But that's okay. I'm glad you're home." Oh, and I'm going to feel the pain of that, and so are you. So are you. I will muddle my way through, but I want to muddle less. I want to be bigger and better and deeper and richer. I want to live so that somebody, somewhere, with deep and eternal gratitude to God says, McGuigan was alive, and it made a difference to my life. And I see you smiling, and that's what you want too. Won't you tell him right here and now, God, I'm going to be better, deeper, richer. I know where the power is. It's all in Him. Where do people get the power to see it through? Where else? Whoever, wherever, whenever lives honorably and decently and sacrificially. I don't care what is their creed. I don't care where they've lived or what their circumstances are. No one has ever lived honorably, but God didn't enable them. And the whole nonsense that God is only working in the lives of Christians is just that, sheer nonsense. There's more honor outside of Jesus Christ, but by the grace of God in the lives of people, than we'll care to confess. It wasn't for nothing that the Master said, how come you don't do more than others? 12 men, 10 men, 9 Jews, 1 Samaritan. Back he came to say, oh, I want to thank you. A city full of Jews, synagogues in every corner. And Christ walks up to a centurion, a pagan, and says, can you beat that? Do you hear him? Can you beat that? I'm telling you, he would say, I've been up north and down south. I've been to the Jordan and Mediterranean. I've never seen anything like it. This man. God does that to people. And He does it for you and me when it's done. Romans 12:1 and 2 says that we're transformed by Him. It isn't an active verb. 2 Corinthians 3:18 says God transforms us. We don't do it ourselves. What nonsense. Hebrews 13:20 and 21 says God does it. And in what is becoming one of my favorite texts, 1 Corinthians 4 verse 7, Paul said to the well-heeled Corinthians, what have you got that wasn't given to you? Huh? Name it. He said, you're awfully rich, aren't you? You're tremendously powerful. You're this, that, and the other. Name it. Tell me that you didn't get from God. And if you got it from God, why are you strutting as though it was bootstrap religion? And if there is a difference between you and other people, who made the difference? He did, of course. Haven't you every now and again, when meanness just comes pouring out of your pores, haven't you every now and again become so discouraged and you looked and said, how in God's name can you profess to love Him? How can you be so callous and indifferent? How can you be so envious? Did you take upon you the name of Christ of a purpose just to shame Him? And you rip open your chest and you say to God, please, would you look at this thing and see if there's anywhere in there that says I love you? Anywhere? God said, yes, here, let me have a look. And He takes your heart and starts peeling it, layer after layer. You walk up and down nervously, waiting and looking over His shoulder every now and again. Nothing. You're back walking up and down again, and finally you hear Him go, ah. And you rush over and look, and deep, way down in the cavern of the heart somewhere, He says, there it is. And you say, where? And He says, look really hard. And you say, but I'm looking. And He says, look really hard. And so you look down in there, and it's awfully dark and gray and dull, and not a white spot to be seen. And then finally you say, is that it? That little place, it's not quite as dark as the other? He says, yeah, that's it. Mine? Yeah. How'd it get there? And He says, why, I put it there. And we say, my white spot bigger than Harry's? Is it bigger than Jennifer's? And God says, what difference does it make? I put it there. I mean, it's all over. It was grace that called us, and grace that sustained us, and grace that gets us home. The smugness and the arrogance The smugness and the arrogance, the superiority that just seems to exude right out of us is so despicable. And if there's a difference, it's because He put it there. I've got 858, and you're doing awfully well. The Lord richly bless you for being here. You know how people are helped to see it through? They experience and enjoy redemptive relationships. That's what they do. The last letter the old man wrote was 2 Timothy. You know, I find it, so it appears to me, that there are 4 big themes in 2 Timothy. Do you know what the most prominent one is? Redemptive relationships. They're all the work of God, of course. In 2 Timothy, he talks about a young man especially related to him. His name was Timothy, and then he says, I'm reminded of your sincere faith which first lived in your grandmother, Lois, and in your mother, Eunice. That's what helps people have the power to see it through. But not too fat, but they can't stoop down and tie your shoelaces. They wear glasses. Sometimes they can take their teeth out. They can answer all the questions about why dogs hate cats and why God isn't married. And when they take you for walks, they don't keep saying to you, hurry up, hurry up. They let you stop and look at things that you want to look at. If they're reading a story, they don't keep skipping over bits and pieces, even if they've read it over and over again. He said everybody ought to have a grandmother, especially if they don't have television. Because grandmothers are the only grown-ups that always seem to have time for you. And grandmother took Timothy on her knee and told him all about God. Lord Shaftesbury was so influenced by not a relative, but one who worked for the family when he was a child. And Eunice taught her boy. And Paul talked of Phygellus and Hermogenes who deserted him. And then he said, may the Lord show mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, because he often refreshed me, was not ashamed of my chains. The story about Onesiphorus, you know. And he goes on in 2 Timothy and talks about, get Mark, bring him with you. That implies Barnabas. And it was Barnabas who gave Paul a break, you remember? And one day Barnabas and Paul get into an argument. I want to take Mark, said Barnabas. Paul said, we're not taking him. And Barnabas says, yes, we are. And Paul said, we aren't. And Barnabas said, Paul, we're taking that kid. And Paul said, I had enough of him. He's not going. And Barnabas said, Paul, he's going. And Paul says, it's either him or me. And Barnabas said, Paul, it's the boy. And now years later, Mark is so helpful to me. Please, bring him. You know how people get the power to see it through? They experience redemptive relationships. There are those who latch onto them in loyalty and will not let them alone. Insist on believing. Insist on being loyal. Wilfred Grenfell, a doctor of a number of years ago who did marvelous work up around Labrador and Greenland and places like that, said that when he was in the hospital, a stretcher brought in a woman dying of terrible burns. The history showed that her husband had come home drunk and thrown a kerosene lamp over her. The police, the husband, and the magistrate were immediately sent for. I can still see the miserable creature standing at the foot of the bed between the policemen, watching every movement of his dying wife. I can see to this very day the magistrate stooping over the bed, warning her that she had only a few minutes to live and that within an hour she'd be standing before her Maker. He kept imploring her to tell the truth as he took down her dying statement. And at last her eyes were raised to the face of the man, the father of her children. The man who had sworn so shortly before to love and protect her until death parted them. And here he was, now her murderer. The silence at the bedside could be cut as we waited for a reply. And as her eyes fell on the familiar features, I can only suppose she saw him as once he had been before booze got a hold of him. For a new light came into them, and she passed out with a line on her lips to save him. My God, she said, it was an accident. It was an accident. And she died. Don't you love that? Don't you love that?
This tape is continuing.
Years ago, an old British chief, wrapped around in the animal skins, was stepping down into the baptistry to be baptized. He asked the fellow who was going to immerse him, what has happened to all my ancestors who were not baptized? Well, they're all in hell, said the preacher, burning. And the old man stood for a moment or two, thought about it, wrapped himself up in the cloak. He said, I believe I'll take my chances with them. Don't you love that? Paul would have understood that. I hear him in Romans chapter 9. I'm not dead sure what exactly he said, but I'm dead sure of what he would have said if he stood right here. I would be glad if it were possible to save my people. I'd be glad to be severed from the Christ. The loyalty, the dedication, the hunger for other people. That's the kind of relationship that helps people see it through. David and Jonathan had that kind of thing, didn't they? I hear in 1 Samuel 23 that when David is down in the mount, the young man comes seeking for him. And the Bible says he strengthened him in his God. He said, David, my father knows, and I know, I'll never get the kingdom. But what do I care? I'm for you. And the contrast between that and poor David, who at times acted like a mafia godfather. Have you ever read his last words or close to them? Shame and a disgrace. But it's men like Jonathan that kept David alive. For I believe that man would have exploded in every direction with his spiritual guts all over the place if God hadn't taken friends like Jonathan and others and sustained him. In 2 Samuel chapter 23, thirsty. In 2 Samuel chapter 23, thirsty. And he half muses to himself, oh, I wish I could have a drink from the fountain at Bethlehem's gate. 3 men heard it. Away they went. 7 miles in the heat, fighting whoever was there to get to the well. 2 back to back. Somebody dropping the skin in there to get it filled. Fighting their way out. 7 miles back. Handing it to him, and he says, oh no, I can't do that. That kind of devotion shouldn't be given to a man. That belongs to God. And he poured it out. And that's recorded in 2 Samuel 23, where all the list of David's marvelous men are. The last man named in that chapter, Uriah the Hittite. Did the chronicler have to do that? Did he have to ruin it? After listing all of those wonderful things about this marvelous leader who called people, not little boys out of the YMCA or the boys' clubs, but grown, hard warriors of men to follow him. That man who could call out of that kind of devotion. Did the chronicler have to write in the last verse of 2 Samuel 23? Uriah the Hittite. Uriah came to David with water. The water of his devotion. And David took it and poured it out like sewer water. And the contrast between how David acted toward Uriah and Jonathan acted toward him is the difference between a redemptive relationship and something very devilish. People get the power to see it through because people will not turn them loose and who continue to believe. Sure, Mark Rutherford said, I should like to add a beatitude. Blessed is the man who gives us back our self-respect. Les Miserables has the story of Jean Valjean, a hardened criminal. At first nothing, but by and by a hardened criminal. Comes into town, nobody wants him. He's embittered, cynical, murderous at heart. Hard as nails. He's allowed in, and the old bishop, he doesn't know him to be the bishop, feeds him and does everything for him, and he steals the man blind. The police catch him, bring him back, and the old fellow said, you left without the candlesticks. And when the police left, he said, Valjean, I bought your soul. You can never be bad again. You know, it made the difference. Have you ever read that? Read it. All the great literature is great literature because it deals with the kinds of things we need to be hearing. Ross McIntyre, they have a letter in Washington. Abraham Lincoln wrote it. Ross McIntyre deserted. Abe wrote a letter that said something like this. Ross McIntyre's a good man. He promises me if we give him another chance, he'll never run away again. Developed it a little, and that was that. You know, they find him dead in the last battle of the Civil War in the hottest spot of the battle with a letter in his billfold. When people believe in us, insist on believing in us, it makes a difference. They give us back our self-respect. Jesus believes in Peter in John 21. I suspect he took him after they'd eaten down the beach a while, away from the rest. It's like him to do that, isn't it? He said to him, Peter, Simon, do you love me? Oh, I do, he said. I do. He said, I want you to feed my sheep. Okay? A little farther down the beach, I suspect. Arm around him. Now looks at him with those big eyes of his. Do you love me? Oh, yes, Lord. You know I love you. Feed my lambs, will you? And then further down the beach, Peter, do you love me? Changes the word. It's stylistic, surely. There's nothing in the words. Peter heard the same question 3 times. And the Bible says it was because he asked him 3 times. That was Peter's number, wasn't it? Now, Peter knew that the Christ had predicted it. Peter knew that the Christ had seen him just at the moment when he'd done it. Yes, but did he really know? Now he knows Christ knows. And what's his last response? Lord, you know everything, don't you? Yes, I love you. And the Christ recommissions him. Christ believing in Peter does it. But then Christ was always that way. He was odd. Wasn't Christ odd? Didn't he have a funny way about him? Didn't they whisper stories about him at the corners? Can't you hear one fellow, as Arthur Gossip said, walking up to a group, hey, listen to this. Listen to this. Better than last week. You'll never believe who he called. Who? No, better than that. Better than that. Who? You'll never guess. Yeah, old money bags, Matthew himself. And do you know what's really funny about it? He walked right up to him, serious as a heart attack. looked him right in the eye while he was sitting counting his money, and says, I want you to leave all of this and follow me. He said it. The man meant it. I could hardly believe it. And they all cackled and giggled. Leave his money. He'll never leave his money. And they laughed a while. Well, a day or two later, somebody said, you know Matthew up and left? He did what? Never the same. Listen to me. You know, it was always there. Nobody ever saw it but my master. It was always there. And it took Christ to see it. Wasn't it that way with you? Didn't he look at you? Weren't there people who in your youth, and even now some of you younger people, aren't there people who think there's nothing there? All shallowness, all self-centeredness, all self-service. Didn't he say he'll never make it? He didn't give a hang. And didn't Christ come up and look you right in the eye and said, I want you, okay? And the word went around, will she? Will he? And you did. And here you are. You know how people survive? You know how they win? You know where they get the power to see it through? They experience redemptive relationships. Lovers look them in the eye and say, in God's name, I believe in you. They take the painful route. They stand by them not only when they succeed, but when they lose. They're willing to bathe not only in the glory, but in the shame that's reflected on us all when our loved ones shame themselves. And when they do it for Christ's sake. Foxwell Burton said this, I don't know of any blessing of a temporal nature for which I ought to render so many thanks as my connection with the Earlham family. It has given color to my whole life. They were eager for excellence, and I caught the infection. At the College of Dublin, at a distance from all my friends and all control, their influence and the desire to please them kept me hard at my books and sweetened the toil that they gave. The distinctions I gained at college were exclusively the result of the animating passion in my mind to carry back to them the prizes which they prompted and enabled me to gain. Haven't you experienced that? Haven't you seen people lonely and hurting with no one? Doesn't it make you want to say, right where you are, God, I'm going to be somebody special to someone in my life. In Luke chapter 22, they're arguing about who is number one. It's the night of his betrayal, the night of his trial, the night before the morning of his brutal murder. And he sits there looking at them. And finally he said, gentlemen, I just want you to know, I really love you. You are the ones who hung in with me. You are the ones who stood by me in all of my trials. That's Luke 22, verse 28. Don't you love that? How did the Christ do this? How did the Master do this? How would he look at that motley crew, hardly worth spitting on? Look at them and say to them, now you are the ones. After they've broken his heart so often, after he'd walked off at times to keep from saying something that was neither prayer nor praise, after being so frustrated, in the middle of it all, how can he say to these selfish people, You helped me. You were there when I needed you. Because behind all their selfishness, he saw what they meant. Behind all their shortcomings and failures, he saw their cherished intentions. And the Christ is so good at crediting to people what they mean to be. Paul Williams once wrote in a poem, "It would help me if you remembered me, not for what I've done, but for all the other things I always meant to do." Will Christ see us hating and attribute murder to that? Will he see us lusting and call it adultery and not see us long to please him and be happy with that? Is he so unfair? Never. In Hebrews chapter 6, verse 10, the Hebrew writer said, God isn't fair. He knows what you've been through. And it's that that helps people see it through. They experience redemptive relationships. Ooh, I don't know where I'm going from here. I don't want to start another point. I'll finish with this. May Lemke, if she's still alive, is 4.5 feet tall. She weighs 90 pounds. She was called by the Milwaukee County General Hospital. They had a 6-month infant named Leslie. He was mentally retarded. He was blind. And he had cerebral palsy. He was a vegetable, totally unresponsive to sound or touch. His parents had abandoned him. The hospital staff didn't know what to do with him until somebody mentioned this nurse governess living nearby. She was a Cockney from England. Would you help us take care of him while he is alive, they said. Said she, if I take him, he'll certainly not die. That was 30 years ago. She was 52 years old at the time. Can you credit that? She raised 5 children to adulthood. She began to work with him. Year after year she cared for him. No movement, no smile, no tears, no sound. If May hadn't tied him to the back of the chair, he'd have toppled over backwards. She never stopped talking to him. She massaged his back, his legs, his arms, and his fingers. She prayed. And sometimes when she prayed, she wept. And she put Leslie's hands up to her cheeks to make him feel the tears. And she would say, I feel sad right now. I'm crying. She refused to consider the child a burden. I didn't seek Leslie. So there's got to be a reason why God gave him to me, she said. May was never reluctant to bring Leslie out in public. She felt so much love for him. She intuitively knew that somewhere in the maze of his damaged brain, something was trying to get out. On the bus, a lady said to her, why don't you put that child in an institution? You're wasting your life. It's you who's wasting your life, she snapped back. This child isn't brought round by kindness and love for an hour, not in a month or not in a year. Lasting kindness will do it. Joe helped her. She got a leather belt made with hooks on it, not hooks, loops on it. Put it around her, put his hands through, and would drag him to try to get him to walk. He was growing big and heavy, and she was tiny. They erected a chain-link fence, put his fingers on it, held him up. After many months, he was able to stand. Then finally, coaxing him along, after many more months, he would crawl along, blind as a bat. Fingers twisted. Then he moved on his own, along the fence. After 3 months, he learned to totter 2 or 3 steps. God, she said, do something for Leslie. He's still a baby, 18 years old. And the Bible tells me to talk to you, God, and I've got nowhere else to go. And she hung in. He kept hitting strings on packages. She bought him a piano, an old beat-up piano, and she would beat that thing and take his fingers and hammer on it. She played the radio 24 hours a day, virtually. And one night in the winter of 71, she awakened at 3 o'clock in the morning. She heard music, turned out to be Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1. She said to Joe, "Did you leave the radio on?" He said, "No." Pick it up. There he was, sitting at the piano, smiling, playing classical music. You hear the story of Lemke? You've seen what he does? Concerts everywhere. Sings like Louis Armstrong and Elton John. He does. Sings better than you, Cal. Wonderful. A girl, a little woman who wouldn't turn a fellow loose, who saw things in him that nobody else saw, and she wouldn't give up. And today we read about Leslie Lemke and find ourselves staggered by what God has done in his life. All because a little woman, your husband, wouldn't let go. People see it through. They live gorgeous lives, productive, happy, full lives, because they experience redemptive relationships. Master, we're so very sorry that we hurt you so. And we want to be better. And then when we are better, we'll do better. Will you at this minute receive of our thanks as we just silently reflect over the years of people, smiling people, weeping people, the feeling of their arms around us, the warmth, the eagerness with which they receive us, their refusal to give up on us. Thank you for all of that. Help us to be that way, will you please? Please do. In Jesus we pray.